fellow board member, Honorary Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Mr. Sunjoy Joshi, Chairman of the Observer Research Foundation, Madam Sasha Rafi, President of AirQualityAsia, members of Parliament, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of AirQualityAsia, I would like to welcome you all and thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to help develop strategies for a transition towards a clean air economy in India, including financing the transition to a green economy, the promotion of renewable energy alternatives, and the building of zero emissions transportation. Having served for 24 years as a member of Parliament in Ireland, I was honoured to join AirQualityAsia, an international parliamentary advocacy group, as its treasurer. Since 2016, AirQualityAsia has been working with high-level policymakers to implement the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030 and the Paris Agreement by helping governments across Asia to strengthen national environmental and energy policies. In 2019, global annual deaths attributed to pollution were more than tuberculosis, malaria, HIV, AIDS combined. There is evidence that the COVID-19 pandemic is worsened because of air pollution. Yet, only less than 1% of total official development and foundation funding is spent on tackling the air pollution problem. If we do not mobilize sufficient resources to tackle air pollution, the impacts of the problem will run out of control. Air pollution and climate change are two sides of the same coin. As the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us, the targeted reduction of many air pollutants can reduce global warming and improve air quality. Ending the financing of fossil fuel development and instead prioritizing investment in growing clean, carbon-free economies will bring immediate benefits to all. It will save many lives. It will improve human and ecological health and well-being, whilst bringing greater prosperity to all. So we must clean up our air across the globe and encourage our decision makers at all levels, national, subnational, and metropolitan, to adopt policies for cleaner air. We hope that this meeting will accelerate this process in India and in Asia in particular. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Sunjoy Joshi, Chairman, Observer Research Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I join Honorable Matthew J. Nolan, Treasurer AirQualityAsia, Honorable Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament and Board Member of AirQualityAsia, all distinguished participants, to the fifth round of consultations which we organized between parliamentarians, experts, and private sector actors in the clean air space. For several years now, we have got used to every winter, air pollution in the National Capital Region making headlines in a country which has the distinction of being the third most polluted country in the world. But chart-busting statistics about India is something different. To my mind, all this is less important than the fact that the problem of air quality today affects not just the NCR, not just Indian metros, but is affecting the health of millions of vulnerable people, even in the smaller tier 2 and tier 3 cities. The continuous degradation of the air we breathe across rapidly urbanizing nodes is held to be responsible for 250,000 premature deaths each year. And its impact on labor productivity is estimated to shave off 1.4% of India's GDP, and that was in 2019, the last normal year we had before the pandemic upended everything. So beyond the bold print of the daily news cycle, air pollution is not a problem that is amenable to headline-grabbing quick fixes or instant solutions. It is neither solved by passing the parcel, shifting blame from one agency to the other. It's about facing the fact that air pollution is a composite, complex problem, intertwined with economic growth, increasing urbanization, rising vehicular pollution, and various local issues, for example, faced by poor farmers with no means of disposing or recycling farm waste efficiently and cleanly. Now, for that matter, pandemic-induced lockdowns may have led to the most dramatic improvements in ambient air quality, but that does not make them a solution to the problem. Rather, the more important debate is about how a post-pandemic recovery can nudge into position key mitigation measures to reduce air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, both require efforts that can bring together all stakeholders in a complex federal polity like India to find answers and also to drill down to real local problems that can only have local solutions. And no doubt, last 2 decades, we've seen all parts of the government machinery, the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive all have been goaded into action at the national and subnational levels. So monitoring stations have been set up in 132 cities in the country to monitor air pollution, and city-specific air action plans have been prepared and rolled out for implementation in the non-attainment and the million-plus cities that over a 5-year period have not consistently met national ambient air quality standards. There is, yes, a far wider acceptance today of more stringent norms, and several technology and performance-based standards are being enforced to control emission levels and protect air quality. For example, the upgrade of BS4 to BS6 for enhanced fuel efficiency standards, higher public transport standards, and the setting up of metro lines are welcome moves. So we are seeing an increasing focus on electric mobility and the recently launched Green Hydrogen Initiative. Some of these pathways are complementary, others will compete with each other. But our hope is that these inspire more decarbonization strategies across industry, because there's a systemic need to build long-term resilience across sectors that are intrinsically connected and actually sustain each other. Technology, yes, is going to be a key driver accelerating efforts to tackle air pollution, but it also remains an area where disruption happens at a fast and furious pace. For this reason, there is a constant need for policy and regulation to remain technology agnostic and avoid the temptation to pick winners and losers amongst a wide gamut of technologies ranging from carbon capture and storage to green hydrogen or EVs, or the list is never ending. Now, incentives for R&D need to be encouraged, need to be incentivized, but the goal of good policy is to reduce emissions and do it quickly and affordably. It cannot be to increase pollution by trapping long-term investment in not-so-clean alternatives that only end up adding to costs over the long term. So economic signaling by way of incentives ultimately has to be on the basis of results and performance and not just capital investments. And that brings us to the most important part of engaging, firstly, various private sector players who have skin in the game for partnerships in innovation and development, and second, involving stakeholders, including the most vulnerable populations through community-based initiatives. Finally, and that's what I'll conclude with, one of the biggest challenges, as always, is the communication of policy and its constant assessment. An open two-way dissemination of information and data is core to understanding any successful strategy to find rising pollution levels and inspire individual and collective action for something that is really everyone's problem to solve. We value our partnership, which ORF has with AirQualityAsia, for precisely this reason, because with our partners, we have a platform that engages with the most diverse set of public policy practitioners, legislators, experts, and leaders in the private sector. Thank you all for joining us in this consultation. Over to you, Shashi.
Thank you very much, Sunjoy, and I'm delighted to see that Shri Nitin Gadkari, the Honourable Minister for the Environment, has joined us. Welcome, Nitin Bhai, and it's very good to have you here. Our fellow members of Parliament, Shri Rajiv, Pratap, Rudy, Srimati Priyanka Chaturvedi, Dr. Amar, Patnaik, and our distinguished speakers in this inaugural session, the Honourable Matthew J. Nolan, Treasurer of AirQualityAsia, Sunjoy Joshi, Chairman of the Observer Research Foundation, Shazia Rafi, President of AQA, and all those listening in on Zoom from around the country and the world. It really is a special pleasure to join you this evening for the inaugural session of the 5th edition of our annual Roundtable on Air Pollution, jointly organized by AirQualityAsia and the Observer Research Foundation. When I first started this initiative back in 2017, with no co-sponsor and minimal resources, little did I imagine that it would become such an important fixture on the annual environmental calendar. Let me begin by thanking each of the distinguished speakers who've taken time out from their busy schedules to participate in the roundtable. I'm especially grateful to Sri Nitin Gadkari ji, the Union Minister for Road Transport and Highways, for agreeing to inaugurate this year's edition. I'm also grateful that my parliamentary colleagues, Rajiv, Rudy, Priyanka, Chaturvedi and Amar, Patnaik, have joined us for this inaugural conversation, despite the considerable pressures on their respective schedules. Now, I don't want to keep you waiting for the Honourable Minister's keynote, but I do want to mention, as I've done in previous editions of this platform, that the crisis of toxic air quality is a serious development challenge that cuts across not just political lines, but across economic, geographical and social boundaries in our country. The 2017 State of the Global Air Report, published by the Health Effects Institute, has revealed that since 1990, the absolute number of ozone-related deaths in India has risen by a staggering 150%. The economic implications of deteriorating air quality are equally ominous, with a 2013 World Bank study estimating that welfare costs and lost labour income due to air pollution cost the exchequer nearly 8.5% of India's GDP, and it might be higher today. Air quality levels are also closely linked with fatality rates associated with the COVID pandemic, with recent studies by Harvard's T-Chan School of Public Health highlighting greater fatality rates amongst demographics that have previously been exposed to high levels of air pollution. Now, I don't need to explain the grave implications of such a crisis to the distinguished members of today's audience, but the larger point that I'm sure all of us recognize is that this is therefore a challenge that no individual group, whether it's government, civil society, or regulatory agencies, can tackle alone. We're all in this together, and it was therefore in a bid to develop a bipartisan, multi-stakeholder forum to develop a more broad-based approach to this problem that I, as a board member of AQA, convened the first roundtable in 2017. Our inaugural edition brought together civil society stakeholders, technical experts, communications professionals, and senior healthcare practitioners, like the current director of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, to a discussion on how we could collaborate and develop a comprehensive strategy to address India's toxic air crisis. But admittedly, despite my best efforts and personal invitations, our initial conversations missed out on a critical stakeholder group whose interventions are vital given the scale and diversity of development challenges we as a nation face. And that was the political class, which to that point had remained largely apathetic to the issue of air pollution. Our voters didn't raise air pollution when we went to our constituencies as an issue of concern to them, and so politicians in turn didn't give it any importance. Which is why it's all the more heartening to see that through the expansion of this platform and the involvement of a non-political institution like the ORF, we have significantly bridged that gap. Unlike the early years of the Roundtable, as a cautious optimist, I believe there's now a growing recognition within the political class that the issue of air pollution, the corresponding impact on larger themes of climate change, as well as the debilitating effects on our own personal health, is one that cannot any longer be ignored. Recent election campaigns have seen political parties outline strategies to address the crisis of poor air. And while we could argue these are often only plans on paper, it's indicative of green shoots and growing awareness among vital players that often steer our nation's development priorities. I believe this is a window that will open up even further in the post-pandemic era. And I must say from recent conversations with Minister Nitin Gadkari that I believe we have a champion in the government for the kind of progress we all want to see making. Even as we slowly begin to see the light at the end of this tunnel, this dark chapter in our collective history as a result of the horrors we've faced in these last 2 years, I believe there's an unsaid commitment that all of us have made to shore up the defenses of the communities we live in and to develop an environment that safeguards our health against such threats. For instance, the limited public expenditure on healthcare, currently at a woeful 1.28% of our GDP, must be improved at all levels, and after COVID, I think it will be. For the COVID pandemic has shown us the importance of investing far more in effective public health systems. We're likely to witness a completely different mindset in the eyes of both the voter and the politician when it comes to recognizing the value of health as a public good. Even as we've suffered significantly this year, there's also a growing recognition that a failure to adequately shore up our public defense system will not just leave us vulnerable to future contagion, but will directly undermine our economic capabilities. At the end of the day, the engine of growth is the Indian workforce, and an unhealthy and vulnerable workforce will not generate the growth we need. There is, I believe, an opportunity in the post-COVID world that we must be ambitious enough to seize and capitalize on. Though in a country as diverse and stratified as ours, the crises that we're required to address daily are many, and often some others will have to take priority over these. But with the greater willingness to engage in matters of health, personal security, and the environment we live in, I believe there'll be a growing recognition that the silent killer of toxic air affects us all, no matter which part of the country we come from, what political or ideological affiliations we may have, or what socio-economic class we find ourselves in. We all breathe the same air, and that is the problem we're here to discuss. With these words, let me once again welcome all of you to the 5th edition of our Roundtable.